CATV, Resistance Radio. Hubris is the defining elite contagion of the 21st century. Just look at the global hegemon. To understand this modern disease, we turn to the GOAT of S-tier literature, War and Peace. Leo Tolstoy does not hide behind anonymity. He takes the wax and feathers of Icarus and grafts them directly onto the back of Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France, to show us the catastrophic hubris of a Western hegemon marching towards Moscow. Crucially, he also provides the exact cure. Act 1. The Radical Historian. To understand modern hubris on a geopolitical scale, let's look at how Leo Tolstoy systematically tore down the ultimate historical idol, Napoleon Bonaparte. Tolstoy wasn't an armchair intellectual. War and Peace dismantles the great man theory of history, and he built his case on relentless, boots-on-the-ground research. Before writing a single word of the novel, Tolstoy served as an artillery officer during the Crimean War, surviving the brutal siege of Sevastopol. About the experience, he wrote, "You will not see war in its correct, beautiful, and brilliant ranks, with music and drums, but war in its real expression, in blood, in suffering, in death." Tolstoy spent 7 years mining data in the Moscow Museum. He walked the Borodino battlefield, hand-sketching topographical maps to prove official state histories, like the establishment hagiography of Adolphe Thiers, were absolute fictions. Tolstoy became a radical empiricist, as he famously declared at the end of his second sketch of Sevastopol, "The hero of my tale, whom I love with all the power of my soul, who has been, is, and will be beautiful, is truth." Tolstoy sought truth from facts. Data led him to a radical conclusion. A king is history's slave. But Napoleon did not get the memo. As the Grand Army crosses the river Niemen into Russia, Tolstoy records the blind devotion of the Polish Uhlans. They plunge their horses into the raging river just to catch the emperor's eye, drowning in the current while shouting, "Vive l'Empereur!" Bonaparte's response? He looked away from 40 men drowning, mildly irritated by the distraction. These 40 lives and those 600,000 soldiers marching headlong into the Russian winter were the kindling for his destiny. This catastrophic self-absorption reaches its zenith at the gates of Moscow. Looking down at the city, Napoleon mentally rehearses the magnanimous speech he intends to deliver to the vanquished populace. It is a script of civilizational condescension, rehearsed today by debauched Western elites. "From the height of the Kremlin, I will give them just laws. I will teach them the meaning of true civilization. I will make generations of boyars remember their conqueror with love." Ursula von der Leyen practically delivered the same speech to Brussels last week. Napoleon expected a choreographed surrender, a delegation of Muscovite elites weeping with joy. Instead, the Russians flipped the script. They had abandoned Moscow and allowed their own historic capital to burn, rather than appear as unpaid extras in a Western conqueror's theatrical production. When reality shattered his illusion, Napoleon's hubris didn't break, it merely fled. Leaving his freezing, starving army behind, he climbed into a luxury sled at Smorgony, wrapped himself in furs, and raced back to the safety of Paris. In retreat, Napoleon repeated his favorite mantra, "From the sublime to the ridiculous, there is but one step." Tolstoy exposes this as the ultimate defense mechanism of the ruling class. To Napoleon, everything he did was good, not because it was right, but simply because he did it. Tolstoy then provides the greatest off-meta foil in literature to Napoleon and his colossal hubris, General Kutuzov. Mainstream historians mocked Kutuzov because he was old, fat, blind in one eye, liked the company of pretty girls, and famously fell asleep during his own staff meetings. But Kutuzov understood what Napoleon couldn't. You cannot control the infinite variables of a continental conflict with elegant geometry on maps and hyper-optimized dispositions. While Napoleon used human lives as raw fuel for his personal engine, Kutuzov operated with a total, radical lack of personal ego. Kutuzov felt and gave himself over to the will of the nation, and for this feeling, the Russian people elevated this old man, in the Tsar's disfavor, to be their representative in the national war, and, unlike Napoleon, he accomplished all of his aims, and devoted all his energy, not to slaying and destroying men, but to saving and showing pity on them. If you want to understand how our modern leaders can completely destroy entire regions, can so comprehensively miscalculate strategy, and then calmly walk away to write million-dollar memoirs, Napoleon's flight from Moscow is the exact historical blueprint. Act 2. Our Modern Mirages. So, flash forward to the modern era. The Western foreign policy elite, the institutional establishment in Washington, London, and Brussels, suffers from the exact same Napoleonic syndrome. They mistake their own hubris for material reality, entirely blind to the laws of history, geography, and civilizational realities that Tolstoy and Kutuzov understood. They assume that because they control the global financial system, the rest of the world must bow. More and more, they simply do not. Look at the West's multi-generational blind spot, Iran. Institutional consensus views the modern Persians through the lens of a profound elite condescension, treating them as a fragile, irrational, backward petrostate, constantly on the verge of implosion. But this narrative completely ignores 4,000 years of history. Iran, however, remembers 1953, when the CIA and MI6 orchestrated Operation Ajax, a coup that toppled their democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. They remember the brutal, Western-backed police state of the Shah that followed, a regime that allowed miniskirts, but not an authentic Iranian identity, catalyzing the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Atlantic Coalition did not reevaluate after this blowback. It doubled down. Throughout the devastating Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the United States and its allies actively funded and armed Saddam Hussein's invading army. They stood by while chemical weapons rained down on Iranian youth in a brutal 8-year conflict where Iran stood totally alone. When Scott Ritter entered Iraq to decommission their chemical stockpiles, he literally had the serial numbers. Assassination became the dirty tactic du jour for the West. First, General Qasem Soleimani in 2020 with a drone missile. DJT doubled down on this illusion in February 2026, launching what he believed would be another weekend war, another Venezuela. Missiles assassinated Ayatollah Khamenei and his family after the global markets closed. Washington and its handlers in Tel Aviv confidently predicted an immediate, chaotic regime collapse. Secretary of State Marco Rubio proudly proclaimed the USA played Robin to the Israeli Batman. We could take the oil again, just like 1953. Like Xerxes ordering his men to whip the sea, This is the ultimate manifestation of 21st century hubris. Instead, Iran stabilized its leadership, hardened its stance, and launched a sweeping, highly coordinated asymmetric counteroffensive, destroying the U.S. bases in the Gulf and throwing global energy markets into chaos with their control of the Straits of Hormuz. We will discover who is playing who as this catastrophe plays out under the umbrella of the Memorandum of Misunderstanding. A second tragic monument to modern Western hubris is the conflict in Ukraine, only more dangerous. To understand this disaster, you have to look past the sanitized narrative pushed by the media and trace it back to the coup of 2014. When the elected Ukrainian government was overthrown, Western ideologues handed out cookies in Kiev, celebrating a democratic awakening in their disciplined doublespeak. While publicly paying lip service to diplomatic peace agreements, NATO systematically transformed Ukraine into a de facto military fortress on Russia's border. It was the geopolitical equivalent of China establishing missile bases on the Rio Grande. They weren't just building a defensive shield, they were training and equipping high-readiness infantry, proxy shock troops designed to bleed a nuclear rival in a low-intensity, attritional conflict. The Western elite convinced themselves of a beautiful illusion that if Russia ever directly intervened, a combination of financial lawfare, advanced Western weapons, and NATO Article 5 would force an immediate, humiliating capitulation. They genuinely believed that sanctions would cause an instant economic cardiac arrest, and that a handful of high-tech Wunderwaffen would easily sweep the battlefield. Meanwhile, the US decoupled Europe from the Nord Stream pipeline and the actual molecules needed to drive the modern economy. And Europe bent the knee. Like Kutuzov, history sleeps through war plan spreadsheets. No amount of narrative compliance can manifest the European men and weapons to take on Russia. Western elites lack the intellectual sophistication to strategically cope with the multinodal order. History tells a different story. It's Russia that has suffered multiple invasions by Europe, including Napoleon himself. The multinodal order is a material reality. Yet Europe still views the world through the lens of its thousand-year history of hillbilly family feuds. The ultimate expression of a lost Europe is begging for US alms to arm proxy shock troops, beginning to manufacture drones when their people need decarbonization, and permanently exiling Russia to Asia when the West desperately needs diplomatic equilibrium. Why does Europe require another Charles de Gaulle to understand a strategy of the Atlantic to the Urals makes complete strategic and complete common sense? Act 3. The Infinite Sky. So, how do we fix institutional rot this deep? Tolstoy gives us the blueprint. But it requires a profound, painful shattering of the ego, ending the corrosion of our moral fighting shape. It requires us to lie on the fields of Austerlitz, like Prince Andrei Bolkonsky. At the start of the novel, Prince Andrei is a man suffocating under a profound, existential ennui. He has honor and a sense of duty, but he lacks a purpose worthy of them, trapped in the shallow high society of St. Petersburg. War becomes an escape from his own listlessness, and his ultimate shot at transcendent glory. His Toulon moment. Napoleon is his hero because Andrei subscribes to the great man theory of history. During the battle, in front of Kutuzov, when the Russian ranks break and panic sets in, Andrei sees his moment. He grabs a fallen standard, rallies the retreating soldiers, and charges directly into the French fire. It is courageous. It is heroic. And he is almost instantly struck down. Lying flat on his back, bleeding into the dirt, the noise of the battle fades away. Andrei looks up, not at Napoleon, not at his flag, but at the sky. In one of the greatest passages of the world's greatest novel, Tolstoy writes, "How quiet, peaceful, and solemn, not at all as I ran. How differently do those clouds glide across that lofty, infinite sky. How was it I did not see that lofty sky before? And how happy I am to have found it at last. Yes, all is vanity, all is delusion, except those infinite heavens." When Napoleon eventually rides across the still smoldering battlefield, he stops above Andrei and declares aloud, "That's a fine death." Andrei hears him, but the words mean nothing to him now. Tolstoy captures the absolute destruction of his hubris in one final, devastating observation. He knew it was Napoleon, his hero, but at that moment Napoleon seemed to him such a small, insignificant creature compared with what was passing now between his soul and that lofty, infinite sky. Our current political and media elites haven't had their Austerlitz moment yet. But if we want to thrive in the 21st century, we must undergo that exact same rewiring. We have to stop looking at the petty empires and apocalypse bunkers our leaders are trying to build, and start looking back up at the infinite sky. Peace.